thank you all for joining us this morning to discuss legislation related to California's Employment Development Department. The reason we're here today is pretty simple. EDD has been failing California. The truth is that this department has been failing for years, and this pandemic really has brought those failures into sharp focus, and it has become a crisis for our state. Every day, my colleagues and I hear from thousands of desperate Californians who are in dire straits. They've lost their job. They don't know how they're going to pay their rent. They don't know how they're going to buy groceries. They don't know how they're going to take care of their kids. And for months, this desperation has been met by a seemingly disinterested EDD bureaucracy who has failed to answer their phone calls, failed to respond to their emails, failed to provide them help in a moment of desperate need. And meanwhile, as we've learned, this department has enabled criminals and fraudsters to steal billions of dollars from these same hardworking Californians. It's outrageous, it's heart-wrenching, and it is totally unacceptable. Throughout the summer, we conducted a number of oversight hearings on EDD, and in the course of those hearings, a number of the folks on today's call, including Assemblymember Chu and I, began to talk about putting together a group of legislators to form a working group on the Employment Development Department. So that's why we're here. We are here to find solutions, here to deliver customer service, here to help Californians when they need it, here to stop fraud, and also make sure that we recover as many of those stolen taxpayer dollars as we possibly can. We'll be introducing members to share their pieces of legislation. I have introduced two pieces of legislation this session. The first, AB 10, will require EDD to cross-check claims against inmate records in order to prevent prison fraud. And the second piece of legislation that I've introduced will establish the EDD Oversight Advisory Board in order to ensure ongoing oversight and accountability for the department. I'm also pushing for the state to beef up our EDD fraud prosecutions, and my colleague, Assemblymember Chu, will go into some more detail on that. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleagues who will outline their legislation. We'll go ahead and take questions at the end. I think you know the drill now. Go ahead and if you want to be recognized, raise your Zoom hand as we move into Q&A. So with that, it's a pleasure to introduce my colleague, Assemblymember Buffy Wicks.
Thank you, Assemblymember Kadi Pichi-Norris. Appreciate your leadership, and also Assemblymember Chu's leadership and all the other members who are on this call today. I think, I won't belabor all of the issues that we've all been experiencing as legislators. You'll hear from many others, and many of you reporters have reported on this. The challenges, folks, they've been on hold 12, 14 hours, can't get any information. Having a hard time communicating with the office, debit cards getting closed with no notice. There's been a number of challenging issues. And so my bill would establish the Office of Claimant Advocate within EDD to be a place to advocate for claimants. The office would be responsible for protecting Californians' rights to seek benefits administered by the department, whether they be unemployment insurance, disability insurance, or paid leave. Additionally, my bill would create a claimant's Bill of Rights that enables more protections for claimants as they're experiencing some of these issues. And really the whole goal of my bill is to provide an additional vehicle of recourse for so many desperate constituents and folks out in our communities that have been faced with a huge burden. I hear from thousands of constituents in my district. Our office has been working to try to resolve those claims as quickly as we possibly can. It has been very eye-opening and heartbreaking. And in the end of the day, government has to work for people. And it is so important that right now government is working for people. And so we have a serious issue here that needs to be addressed. My office, along with others, have been working on it. And we're looking forward to working with the governor's office on addressing some of these issues and making sure that EDD works for everyone. And with that, I'm going to introduce Laurel Carter, who is a constituent of mine and also someone who has experienced the challenges with the EDD for her to share her story. Laurel, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Assemblymember Wicks. My claim started out fairly smooth in April of 2019, and it wasn't until about mid-December that I received a suspension for possible fraud. No other explanation given. It gave me no action, no way to say that I was me. It took about 2 weeks before they even said that they were going to contract with the company, and they would later give me information on how to do that. Once I was given the information, about 3 weeks into not receiving any payments, that company, ID Me, who obviously, just like EDD, was overrun with over 1 million people trying to verify their identity. As simple as a driver's license upload, they couldn't take. They then said I could produce several more pieces of information, and they would let me speak to someone, that they were available 24/7. I clicked the button after I uploaded all my information, and it said there was a 5+ hour wait. Now, if it was 5 hours, that was fine. I slept with my computer on for 8 days, just thinking that maybe in the middle of the night, I would, hear a ding and it would be someone that would speak to me. I'm now 6 weeks in without any payment, any just response from ID Me. I've emailed them, I've tried to call, there's no phone number to call. And I had a 10-day window to verify that I was me with EDD that has come and gone. I've heard nothing from them. The only information I've received is that identity verification has been extended 30 days. So I'm 3 weeks into that 30 days. I've had to borrow money from my family and friends, luckily, to keep my rent, keep my car in front of my house. And I just need some answers. And all I'm hearing right now from EDD and even from the news is everything about the fraud and how much money they've lost. But just to cast such a wide net and then see what shakes out, instead of, that was their mistake in their process. And what about all of us that are who we say we are? And we need some kind of answers. And whoever makes these decisions on the contracts, the Bank of America contract, the ID Me people have definitely been overrun. Who set all of that up? Who made those decisions? That's a bigger, problem coming out of this also. And I really thank everyone that, I know this is not really your first job, to be EDD specialist is not what you all went into this for. And I do appreciate the time, and I appreciate everyone introducing these bills. Thank you. And I'd like to now introduce Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. And your story is heartbreaking because we've heard it time and time again. In fact, we've heard it from 2,000 of my constituents from January 1st until today. 2,000 constituents have called and reached out to our office because of similar but various issues with EDD, with ID Me, and with Bank of America. And so we know that your story is unfortunately replicated up and down the state. And hopefully with your story today, maybe we can get a little bit more attention from EDD and get it fixed today, Laurel. Anyone that needs help, first of all, most important, it is our job. It is our job to help our constituents get their EDD. That is by far our first and foremost our job. So if you need help, you can always call me at 619-338-8090. We will help anyone. So I think it's really important to put that out. But I have a bill, and it's called AB 74, and it's very simple. It became very clear that this idea that all EDD payments have to go through Bank of America makes no sense. Our constituents should be able to get their payment on a paper check if they want, or directly deposit it into their own bank. The problem with everybody going through Bank of America, which we're seeing, is that if you're not a customer of Bank of America, they have no responsibility to be very accommodating to your concerns about your card being frozen or fraud or not receiving your card. And that debit card, of course, also has to be utilized through Bank of America. It does not make sense for a vast majority of our constituents to have to use a Bank of America debit card. We think that, we're only one of 3 states that doesn't allow direct deposit into our own bank accounts. These are people who were working before the pandemic. Most of them, overwhelmingly, most of them have bank accounts. It's not the same as some other services. And so we think that they should continue to be able to have that direct deposit, cut out the middleman if they so choose. If they choose to have the Bank of America debit card, that's fine. And if they choose to have a paper check, they should be able to have that choice as well. So it's pretty simple. We know it requires some programming capabilities of EDD. We're hopeful that as we move this bill through, that EDD is actually responsive. That contract with Bank of America is up in June. They can restructure that contract now in order that our constituents could get relief even sooner than the normal legislative process. So that's what we're pushing for, and pushing to ensure, the most important thing for us, all these things are important. The most important thing is that our constituents have money to be able to pay the rent, to be able to put food on the table, to be able to live during these very challenging times. And so that's what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to move the ball on those issues as quickly as possible. With that, I'm going to kick it off to my colleague, Assemblymember Chad Mays.
Thank you so much, Lorena. And I also want to say to Laurel, I am so sorry that you've had to go through that. You are a representative of hundreds, if not thousands, of constituents in my district, and tens of thousands across the state. EDD and our unemployment insurance program has failed Californians. And we need to, as representatives of the state, understand that and be very honest with the people of California that we have failed them in this regard, and we've got to fix it. So I'm thankful to my colleagues. I'm thankful to David Chu and to Kadi, who are leading the effort, but also the rest of the members that are on here, because every single one of us, all 80 members of the Assembly, are incredibly frustrated that we're not being able to serve the people of our districts and serve the people of California. I do have a bill as well, and just want to talk a little bit about that. Every member on this call, as spoken, have been inundated with these EDD issues. One of the things is that applications through EDD are confusing at best and nonsensical at worst. Our constituents should not be punished for a misunderstanding caused by the agency's faulty intake application process. Under current law, an applicant can have their benefits terminated if they submit an inaccurate statement. Currently, the only way that my constituents and constituents all across California are notified of this issue is through a very small box on an already complicated form that, if missed, locks them out of their benefits from anywhere from 5 to 23 weeks. Up to 23 weeks to be locked out of benefits. It's absolutely unacceptable when this is a lifeline for so many Californians. So AB 397 will require the department to send clear notice to claimants if EDD has identified this issue with their application. Instead of automatically cutting benefits off, claimants would have the right to fix any unintentional misstatement. In my conversations with the agency, this system has been billed as a fraud prevention measure. And believe me, we want to make sure that there isn't any fraud, because the cost of the mismanagement has been overwhelming. This legislation does not change the agency's ability to investigate and prosecute fraud. Instead, we are focused on clarifying and simplifying the maze of forms individuals must navigate to keep their benefits. By providing a clear right to fix unintentional mistakes, Californians will not be unnecessarily denied to have help when they need it the most. And with that, I'll move on to Assemblymember David Chu.
Thank you, Assemblymember Mays. And let me start by just thanking all of our great colleagues, our staff, advocates who've been working together in the past few months to put this package together. And I also want to take a moment and acknowledge our many staff around the state who've been working around the clock, essentially as crisis hotline workers when EDD has been unable to respond to our constituents like Laurel. Laurel represents the face of, at this point, probably over 1.5 million Californians. Today, I'm going to dive into 2 topics, language access and fraud. On language access, we have just heard how hard it is for Californians to access benefits, but we know that these difficulties are exponentially compounded if you speak a language other than English. Our state has our nation's largest limited English proficient population. 7 million Californians speak a language aside from English. While many of them are Spanish speakers, 2.4 million of them speak a language other than Spanish or English. We all know during this pandemic, people of color and immigrants have been particularly hard hit. They're much more likely to work in sectors shut down by this pandemic. They need EDD to work. And it's well documented that EDD isn't working for English-speaking claimants, and it's next to impossible for those not proficient in English. Quoting the September report by Governor Newsom's EDD strike force, quote, individuals who are not fluent in English face insurmountable barriers to receiving assistance, and we can't effectively shut 7 million people out of receiving their benefits. Our bill, AB 401, would work to alleviate those burdens by requiring EDD to identify a claimant's language needs, provide expanded translation of applications and other vital forms, increase multilingual phone lines, require EDD to communicate with claimants in their preferred language in a timely manner, and establish a review process to monitor progress and proficiencies and deficiencies in this area. Second topic of fraud. Late last year, I was the first legislator to suggest that the level of fraud might approach $1 billion. And at the time, I had hoped that I was wrong and that my suggestion was an overestimate, but it turns out that I and all of us were way off in the wrong direction. This month, EDD reported a staggering level of fraud, confirming $11 billion paid in fraudulent claims. And while that number alone is shocking, it's likely a fraction of the total fraud. EDD is currently investigating another $19 billion of fraud. Now, there's been a lot of work on fraud that we as policymakers haven't been privy to, but in conversations that Assemblymember Petrie Norris and I have had with DAs and law enforcement agencies around the state, we've heard consistently that they are woefully underfunded and undersupported. Many offices can barely devote an investigator and a prosecutor on the most egregious cases. We know that investing more resources will allow us to go after criminal syndicates, easily recoup these expenses, and get money to honest Californians. And this is why today, Assemblymember Petrie Norris and I and others are proposing a $55 million budget allocation to create and fund a coordinated task force of local and state law enforcement agencies to address this mountain of fraud. It's comparable to specialized fraud programs that target auto insurance fraud, disability and healthcare fraud, and workers' compensation insurance fraud. Quite simply, we need to get to the bottom of this. And with that, it's my honor to introduce my great colleague from LA, Assemblymember Santiago.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. And yeah, you were laughed at when people thought it was $1 billion and you threw that number out there. Now we're laughing and hoping that it was the number that you actually had mentioned. And it is very true. Our bill, AB 19, is pretty simple. It basically says the Californians should continue to get their unemployment benefits, whether or not the federal government is acting or whether or not the federal government has moved quick enough for us. And it's merited. People can't afford to not get the unemployment benefits. They've got to pay rent. They've got to pay for groceries. Little kids depend on it. Kids go hungry at night. We're in a global crisis, a pandemic with few jobs. People need the money. And it's mind blowing that the one job, the one and only job that EDD has, which is to give unemployment benefits, it has failed at. If this was an exam, it would have gotten a big fail. Bottom line, there's no other way around it. And our staffs have basically turned into folks who help our constituents navigate through EDD. It is our job, it is our responsibility. We're happy to do it, but the reason we're doing it is because the department failed us. We get hundreds and hundreds of calls, and it's the number one thing that comes up: EDD, EDD, EDD. No matter where I go to grocery store, we're at food giveaways, we walk around the district, and it is the number one thing that people will talk to us about. And it's mind blowing to think about $11 billion in fraud and potential 19. We could have paid for everyone's rent. We could have paid for utilities, and we probably could have given groceries to everybody who's in the poverty level. I mean, that's how much money we blew. And so le quiero decir a los medios de comunicación en español que nosotros sabemos que la gente está frustrada y hemos introducido proyectos de leyes para mejorar la situación con EDD. Y que llamen a nuestras oficinas cuando ocupen ayuda. Pero imagínense el fraude de 11 billones de dólares y la potencial por 19 más billones de dólares en fraude. ¿Pudiéramos pagar la renta de toda la gente que necesita ayuda en California y darle alimentos y pagar por muchas otras cosas que la gente está sufriendo ahorita? En el tiempo que no hay trabajos, y no hay ayuda. Y EDD falló en el único trabajo que tiene y la única responsabilidad que tiene, que es darle el cheque a la gente que se lo merece y trabajó duro para obtener. EDD nos ha fallado y suficiente, ya basta. Y con eso, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Assemblymember Rudy Salas from the Central Valley.
All right. Thank you, Assemblymember Santiago, and thank you to all the members that helped put this together. Obviously, this is an issue we've been dealing with for a long time. Since the pandemic started, I know a lot of our offices, you've heard that repeatedly said, as we've been inundated with phone calls because people are hurting and people are suffering. Let me introduce myself. I'm Assemblymember Rudy Salas. I represent the Central Valley in California. I'm also the chair of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. Because of a lot of these issues, this is why we called for an emergency audit last fall. I believe every member on this call signed on to that letter. We had it in a bipartisan fashion. It was Democrats, Republicans, Assembly members, and senators that all came together, wanting to have an independent look at what EDD is, not only the processes, but how do we fix those things. This week and last week, we had oversight hearings on EDD. And I think what those hearings and what the state auditor concluded was there's a lot of problems at EDD, which we know because we've been hearing about it from all of our constituents. The hearings and what we're hearing only confirmed the frustrations that many Californians throughout the state are feeling and seeing. And Laurel, we hear you, we see you, and we're definitely, one of the reasons why we're on this call is so because we want to fix it. We want to fix it moving forward. And that's why we've all introduced legislation to help do that. Not to say, hey, Governor, hey, EDD, we want you to do these things. We're asked, no, we want to tell them that we want these reforms instituted. EDD needs to be reformed. It needs to be more responsive to Californians, especially in a time of need. When you look at some of these issues that have been identified, they've been issues that have been around for over a decade. And so that's why we're asking those tough questions of why isn't this reformed? Why isn't this being done now? We knew from the last economic downturn from the 2008 recession that we were going to see an uptick in UI benefits. We understand you had to scale up, but why didn't you have a plan in place? So Assembly Bill 56, which I've introduced, helps address some of those deficiencies at EDD. It's going to force and compel them to, one, have a comprehensive plan, two, to do some of the basic things that the media has reported on, which is making sure we do a cross-check with the prisons to make sure that people that are ineligible to receive these benefits are not receiving them, right? We're going to make sure that EDD is not contributing to identity theft by sending out correspondence and letters to individuals with their full Social Security numbers. You know, these are common sense measures. We're asking for these reforms and we're pushing legislation to do that. And I just want to say, para todos que hablan español, aquí estamos, nos miramos, estamos escuchándolos y aquí estamos para ayudarlos. Nosotros sabemos que hay muchos problemas con el departamento de EDD, pero aquí estamos para luchar para ustedes. Aquí estamos para subir que ustedes van a tener personas que van a pelear para ustedes. Y aquí estamos para ustedes. All right, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Assemblymember Nazari.
Thank you, Assemblymember Salas, and thank you very much to all my colleagues who have joined as a strong band of voice for all our constituents throughout the state. I join as a co-author on all of these package of bills, as well as a representative of the San Fernando Valley constituency that I get the honor to represent with the disproportionate number of entertainment industry workers who have been suffering mostly silently for a very long time since last March, with all the productions having halted in the state, in and around the state. I very much appreciate Ms. Laurel's comments, Ms. Carter's comments. In her descriptive tone, she explained all the challenges that everyone silently goes through in our state. And what I marvel at, and I'm embarrassed, amazingly embarrassed, is that no one should live the way Ms. Carter has been living in the 5th largest economy of the world, with the tech industry in its backyard. It is remarkably embarrassing for all of us, and especially having gone through this experience just a short 11 years ago. with the economic impact of 2008 and the ensuing depression that that the state of California felt along with the rest of the nation, we should have learned better from our lessons. And so I hold EDD accountable for all the missteps that have taken place. I look forward to working in putting the appropriate pressure on them, as well as the administration, to make sure that some of these challenges are alleviated as quickly as possible. With that, would like to turn it over to my colleague, Chair of Budget Sub-4 Committee, that has the privilege of overseeing these functions, Ms. Wendy Carrillo. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Nassarian, and thank you to all the members that are here and everyone that's listening in. My name is Wendy Carrillo. I'm honored to serve all of the people who call the 51st Assembly District home. I'd like to make a few points in English and in Spanish. As chair of the Budget Subcommittee on State Administration, I convened a hearing on January 26th with testimony from both Bank of America and EDD officials. Bank of America stated that more than 450,000 Californians still have frozen accounts, that wait times to speak with a Bank of America customer service was only about 2 minutes, yet this does not align with the experiences of my constituents nor across California, nor with press reports quoting the B of A workers who spoke with anonymity. Simultaneously, EDD stated that they were on target to clear out nearly 100% of the backlogs claims filed in 2020 by the end of last month. Yet again, this does not align with the experience of my constituents, nor with the recent auditor's report finding that only 16% of calls to EDD are actually answered. During the hearing I chaired, an EDD spokesperson called the decision to freeze accounts a data-driven decision. I've been thinking a lot about the families who have also been making data-driven decisions over the course of this pandemic, even though they haven't been calling those decisions that. After spending 5 hours for 3 consecutive days attempting to upload documents, searching for a smartphone that can take a 3-dimensional selfie, and waiting to reach an ID me trusted identity referee just to file or reopen a claim, how many parents without childcare, without broadband internet access, just give up and stop calling Bank of America and EDD? 1.1 million of California households owe back rent. How many of them came up short when the first of the month came because EDD and Bank of America did not provide what they needed? The economic crisis in my district and throughout the state has worsened, especially for those who are currently living on the partial earnings received from EDD. To make matter worse, a recent state audit discovered that EDD may have overpaid individuals, some of whom are still receiving these benefits. In order to rectify these mistakes, EDD will soon embark on a process to ask for repayment from those who received this misaligned funds total in good faith and through no fault of their own. How can anyone expect my constituents and the people of California to return the milk carton, the carton of eggs, the bags of rice or beans that they've already purchased? Because that is exactly where those dollars went. Why should the burden of EDD's mistakes be placed on the backs of Californians? Seeking a repayment of unemployment individuals only puts families deeper into a never-ending cycle of debt and poverty. This is why I'm committed to limit and modify the guidelines as to how the department may recoup EDD overpayments where there has been no indication of fraud. As elected officials, we are charged with problem solving, not finger pointing. What you've heard from my colleagues and I are a set of proposals to transform the system that is currently in place. My role as chair of the Budget Subcommittee on State Administration is to also direct resources where they are needed today. Those who have been harmed by backlogs, by frozen accounts and fraud deserve to be made whole. Those who have been given up and stopped trying need us to make EDD work in order to trust the government again. Now, a few words in Spanish. Buenos días, mi nombre es Wendy Carrillo. Es un honor para mí servir a todas las personas que viven en el Distrito 51, la Asamblea Estatal de este estado. Como presidenta del subcomité de presupuesto para la administración estatal, convoqué una audiencia el 26 de enero con testimonio dado por los funcionarios del Banco de América y el Departamento de Desempleo. el Banco de América declaró que más de 450,000 californianos todavía tienen sus cuentas congeladas y que los tiempos de espera para hablar con el personal de servicio del cliente del Banco de América era solamente 2 minutos. Esto no es alineado con las experiencias de personas que viven en mi comunidad o con los informes de la prensa que citan a los trabajadores del Banco de América que hablaron con reporteros bajo condiciones de anonimato. Al mismo tiempo, el Departamento de Desempleo declaró que estaban bien en el objetivo de eliminar casi el 100% de todas las reclamaciones atrasadas presentadas durante el año 2020 para finales del mes pasado. Una vez más, esto no se alinea con las experiencias de personas en mi comunidad o con el informe del auditor que indica que solo el 16% de las llamadas del departamento actualmente son contestadas. Durante la audiencia que presidí, una portavoz del Departamento de Desempleo calificó la decisión de congelar las cuentas como una decisión basada en datos. He estado pensando mucho en las familias que han estado tomando decisiones basadas en datos durante el transcurso de esta pandemia, aunque no las llaman de esta forma. Después de 3 días, dedicando 5 horas al día al intento de subir documentos en línea, tratando de conseguir un teléfono smartphone que pueda tomar una foto selfie tridimensional, tratando de ver un arbitro de identidad confiable del programa ID.me solo para presentar o reabrir un reclamo. ¿Cuántos padres sin cuidado de niños, sin acceso a las redes, en computadoras se han dado por vencidos y dejan de llamar al Banco de América y el Departamento de Desempleo? 1.1 millones de familias en California deben rentas pasadas. ¿Cuántos de ellas pudieron juntar la renta completa el primer día del mes por culpa del Departamento del Desempleo y el Banco de América? La crisis económica en mi comunidad y en el estado se ha puesto mucho más peor, especialmente para aquellos que actualmente viven de los ingresos parciales que reciben del Departamento de Desempleo. Para empeorar las cosas, una auditoría estatal reciente descubrió que el departamento puede haberle pagado en exceso a ciertas personas, de cuales algunas siguen recibiendo estos beneficios. Con el fin de rectificar su error, el departamento pronto embarcará en un proceso para solicitar un reembolso de aquellos que reciben el dinero de buena fe y sin culpa de ellos. ¿Cómo podemos esperar que personas en mi comunidad y los demás a través del Estado devuelvan la leche, el cartón de huevos o la bolsa de arroz y frijoles? Porque en esas cosas exactamente se gastaron esos dólares. ¿Por qué la carga de los errores del Departamento de Desempleo debería recargar sobre las personas de este estado? Buscar que las personas desempleadas paguen un reembolso solo hace que las familias sumerjan más en un ciclo de deuda y de pobreza. Es por eso que me comprometo a limitar y modificar las pausas sobre cómo el departamento puede recuperar los pagos en exceso que hicieron como no haya incidentes de fraude. Como funcionarios electos, estamos encargados de resolver problemas, no solamente señalar culpables. Lo que han escuchado hoy es un conjunto de propuestas legislativas para transformar el sistema actual. Mi función como presidenta del Comité de Presupuesto para la Administración Estatal también es canalizar los recursos a donde se necesitan hoy día. Aquellos que han visto perjudicados por los retrasos, las cuentas congeladas y el fraude, merecen ser atendidos. Aquellos que se han rendido y han dejado de intentarlo necesitan que hagamos que funcione el Departamento de Desempleo para que vuelvan a confiar en el gobierno y en nosotros. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Daniela Urban from the Center for Workers' Rights to speak.
Thank you, Assemblymember Carrillo, and to all the members for your leadership on reforming EDD. EDD has not been listening to their claimants or responding to their needs. the Center for Workers' Rights has coordinated a weekly statewide meeting of advocates for unemployed workers to identify common problems. We send these issues each week to EDD in hopes that they will take steps to fix not just the case examples we provide them, but the root causes of these problems. Back in April, we noticed a trend for hundreds of workers who were trying to obtain unemployment benefits and were finding their online accounts mysteriously saying they were disqualified when these claimants met all the eligibility requirements. Claimants and advocates raised the issue with the department, and their response was appeal. Only after writing a letter to EDD leadership, sending dozens of examples of claimants who were being disqualified without notice or explanation, did EDD finally realize that it was prior applications that were preventing payments of benefits when due. Had EDD listened, thousands of claims would have been paid weeks earlier. This delay comes at a cost. EDD's oversight on this disqualification caused one of our clients to call us as he began to take steps towards taking his life when he no longer could feed his 4 children. How did EDD not catch this problem with their eligibility screening in the 5 years since they've had UI Online? It's because they haven't listened to claimants. These bills will no longer make the voices of claimants an optional consideration. The advocate community has been seeking changes in EDD procedures for decades. And with these new laws, EDD will no longer be able to disregard our perspective. That is why the Center for Workers' Rights is a co-sponsor of AB 401 on language access with Assemblymember Chu, AB 397 with Assemblymember Mays on false statement penalties, AB 400 with Assemblymember Petrie Norris on the oversight body, and AB 405 with Assemblymember Wicks on the Office of Claimant Advocates. The introduction of these bills is neither the start nor an end to our fight for changes at EDD and our hopes that the benefits EDD administers actually can be a safety net for all Californians. I turn it now back to Assemblymember Chu for questions and answers.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Urban, and really appreciate the advocacy of you and your colleagues, as well as all of our legislative colleagues for everyone's efforts on this important issue. As was mentioned earlier, we've been convening for months to find solutions to some of the most pressing issues with regards to EDD. I want to mention that our group has been in early conversations about these proposals with Governor Newsom's administration. We very much appreciate the engagement and collaboration, and we look forward to our work together to find solutions that allow us to hopefully turn this agency around and move on to other pressing issues. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions from the press. If you are a member of media and want to ask a question of the panel, please use the raise hand function. My communications director, Jennifer Quart, will call on you and unmute your line. And then I will say to our colleagues, I'm going to ask you if you can just jump in as you see fit, and I'll also try to direct questions to different members as I can. With that, Jen, do you want to recognize anyone?
Yeah, the first person we have in the queue, there's a question from iHeartMedia. I'm going to unmute your line.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. What you're proposing makes a lot of sense, but on one hand, you're asking EDD to speed up processing claims, and on the other hand, you're saying, let's stop the fraud. And from what we heard from the state auditor and others, it was speeding up processing early on after the pandemic hit that led to some of the fraud and abuse. And I'm just wondering how you're approaching this differently, how you think that they can do both, speed up and stop fraud.
I'll start with an answer to that. It's a question we've all been grappling with. EDD has to be able to do both. What we had heard for many, many months was that EDD was focused on fraud to the exclusion of getting benefits out in a timely way to honest Californians. And what we learned from the audits was they were actually doing neither. They were not blocking fraud, nor were they getting checks out to honest Californians. And the strike team, with their report, gave recommendations on how we could be doing both at the same time, and we have to do both at the same time. It's not acceptable to say that we're going to stop payments to our constituents because we're grappling with fraud, because at this time, we've got 1 million+ Californians that are in desperate need of these checks. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I can jump in if you'd like. Assemblymember Chu. Just because a lot of this was actually talked about in not only the audit reports, but some of the things that the members, when we've been having our oversight hearings, have been discussing as well. And when you look at how do we tap down on the fraud, and yeah, of course, we want every person that's eligible for benefits to get them in a timely manner and get them soon, because we know Californians are suffering throughout the entire state. But there are things that were identified over a decade ago that the Department of EDD should have been implementing, right? Why didn't we have an automation system in the first place? Right? We heard about the big rollout of ID.me and then the company that they hired to actually help prevent some of the fraud. But this was months, almost half a year later. And we're asking, why wasn't this done before? Why weren't these things implemented from the last downturn, from the Great Recession after 2008? So we can have both ways. And that's why we're asking those tough questions. And that's why you see a number of legislators here in a bipartisan fashion introducing legislation to reform EDD, because we need these reforms to be implemented. Californians are frustrated. Californians are fed up, and they just want the system to be fixed. And we're all committed to doing that. We're all committed to fixing the system moving forward.
I think I saw Assemblymember Gonzalez. Did you want to raise your hand on this?
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember what we're facing, which is different than traditional. We have the traditional UI system, one which was paid into by employers or throughout time, and that has been a very tough system for our constituents to actually get through for whatever reason. And this isn't only in California. We've always made unemployment insurance really hard to get. Like somehow, I think it's a remnant probably of the 1980s when we thought people were going to exploit the system. But it's also very clear that you work for somebody, it was your employer. When the PUA came in from the national level, that was with certain terms to get it out. And there is no documentation from an employer, because those are people who are independent contractors or small businesses. So it allowed for that fraud. So we have to understand that, yes, fraud is an ongoing issue, especially in the PUA division, where there's less paperwork that's already established. But, it's not as if under the traditional UI system, we have been client friendly, if you will. We haven't tried to get people the money they need. And as far as my constituents are concerned, yes, we're going to take care of fraud. That's a long-term issue. But right now, people who are needing that money to pay their rent, to put food on the table, that is my number one concern. And so, when you see people losing their house, losing the car they're sleeping in because they already lost their house, not being able to pay their medical prescriptions because they're not getting their EDD, that is my immediate concern in a global pandemic, and it probably should be all of ours.
And one more word on this, Assemblymember Carrillo.
Thank you, Assemblymember Chu. I would like to echo the comments of my colleague, Assemblymember Gonzalez. We've been having a lot of hearings, and one of the things that has come out throughout our conversations has actually been about unemployment insurance. In the last 5 years, the department has had 4 different people take on the role of Deputy Director of Unemployment Insurance that reports directly to the Secretary of Labor. The last person that was there for 3 months and left less than 2 weeks ago. The Undersecretary of Labor position has been vacant for quite some time. We also have a Secretary of Labor that unfortunately is going to be leaving the state of California and joining the Biden administration. So it leaves a lot of the leadership questions of EDD and management in a lot of questions in terms of how does the state ensure that there's consistency when there's so much of a revolving door when it comes to the leadership of the department and ensuring that things run smoothly. And so we are tasked with finding talented, innovative people that can think outside the box and outside of the status quo in terms of how the agency and the department function. And so I'm looking forward to what that actually looks like, what leadership comes to the table with EDD. How do we fill in these very important positions to help the department run, and at the end of the day, help the 40 million people that call California home and need us to act with more urgency.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Ms. Court, do you want to recognize the next question?
Yes. Next question from Katie Orr.
Okay. Hello. You guys can all hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. So I have two questions. First, Assemblyman Chu, that $55 million that you're proposing, would that be part of the immediate budget action that the legislature is considering, or would it be part of the regular June budget? Also, a question just in general. A lot of what you're talking about seems like it could be improved if the computer system that EDD uses is improved. I mean, we all know it's from the 1980s. So is there any appetite to, put funding toward that?
So I'll start the answer in a couple of ways. With regards to the budget request, we would like the budget request to be considered as soon as possible. So we'll be in conversations with the administration about that. We've heard from DAs all over the state that they are completely under-resourced. They can only go after the most egregious cases. And we know that any investment in this area will more than recoup itself as far as monies we get back to California and back into the pockets of honest Californians. With regards to the IT system, this is something that many of us have been talking about for some time. 10 years ago, during the Great Recession, our predecessors, prior legislators, documented in excruciating detail the breakdowns in information technology. And EDD requested over $250 million, $260 million from one vendor, Deloitte, to allegedly upgrade the system over the past decade. Clearly, that did not happen. So it is incumbent upon us at this time to figure out what are the next steps. Now, the reality is modernizing this system is complicated and will take a great deal of time. And so EDD up to now has chosen to effectively defer a conversation on modernization, which may make sense as we're grappling with the immediate issues of the day at this moment. But very quickly, we need to pivot on what a long-term modernization will look like. And I think there are many ways in which we need to do it. We have to do it differently. This touches on longer-term issues of how IT reform happened in the state of California. The EDD strike team report laid out a number of ways in which the modernization conversation needs to occur, but occur differently. And it's my hope that this year, as we're dealing with the immediate short-term crisis, we are also starting to talk about what's it going to take medium-term, longer-term to make sure that we are never back in a situation again, that 5-10 years from now, when the next recession hits us, we can be proud of an EDD system that is up to date. So with that, colleagues, anyone else?
Yeah, I would just add, I would just add one thing. So I think that is totally spot on. And I think that the question around the challenges of the underlying technology and our legacy systems is also spot on. But it is important to note that the issues that have been identified at EDD in the strike team report, in the auditor's report, it's not just about the underlying technology. There have been very basic failures of basic business operations and basic management practices. So we've got to tackle all three if we're going to get this department back on track and make sure that this never happens again.
I want to recognize Ms. Urban from the Center for Workers' Rights with a comment on this question.
Thank you. Yes, and I agree. It is not just the technology. What we've learned over the years in working with EDD is that they don't think of the implementation of technology from a claimant perspective. We saw that with the rollout of ID.me just back in September and October, when they didn't think about the fact that they were rolling it out over the change of a quarter, which changes eligibility for benefits. They could have sped up by 1 week or waited 1 week and eliminated many of the issues with claimant benefits. And that's the way that claimant voices need to be a part of the conversations with EDD as they implement technology. So that it doesn't make sense to give EDD more money to institute new technologies if we don't have the oversight body that's being proposed today, as well as the claimant advocate office that we're also asking for, as well as the knowledge that language access is going to be included in the conversation about these new technologies. When UI Online rolled out, we were a part of those conversations, but too late. They didn't ask us about what language access needs needed to be included in that system. And as a result, it doesn't even document the written languages that claimants would prefer to have their notifications provided in. And it only provides the two languages, English and Spanish, that EDD has the capability of providing information in those languages. And that's why these bills are so forward thinking, because we're not thinking about just a new computer system or a one-off changes or a new audit report. They're thinking about long-term. How do we not repeat what happened during the recession, what is happening now, so that when we get to this situation again in the future, we have identified those problems before they cause the level of grief that the issue with unemployment has caused right now.
Let's go to the next question, Ms. Court.
The next question will come from Chris Chimura. Chris, your line's open.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so very much. California likes to say that it leads, but in this case, it sure looks like California is going to have to follow. In your research, what states are doing better than California and present us with a model for moving forward? Similarly, we have a bunch of companies involved, Bank of America, Deloitte, and to a lesser extent, Thomson Reuters with its fraud filters. What companies do better than our current vendors that will lead us forward to fix this?
I'll start with a quick answer on that. I think it's fair to say that every state has been grappling with this in a very intense way, particularly when it comes to fraud by criminal syndicates. California has been hardest hit, in part because we have such a large population. But I think it's fair to say, and I've been in touch with legislators in other states, everyone is struggling with at this point, and there really isn't a North Star that I'm aware of, but we're all trying to share information on best practices. With regards to companies, I think what we are probably all in agreement with as Assembly members is the vendors that have been doing the work thus far, in particular, Bank of America and Deloitte, have not met the standards that we need them to meet. And so from my perspective, we need to open up the conversation to other voices, to other technologies, to figure out how we innovate in a smart way. I'm not going to uplift any particular potential vendor at this moment, except to say that I do believe that there are many companies and vendors out there that could assist our state in positive ways. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'm just going to point out that states, if you go back and look at reports, states in when people first become unemployed had terrible times. I remember some of the stories out of Florida, and these are people who had paid into the system. This isn't the federal PUA. So what California experiences is bad, but every state, like Assemblymember Chu says, has problems. One of the things we do, though, we do give more money. We do actually try to, we have an attitude of trying to help people. We're not taking, I don't want to say it on a partisan, but you find Republican states who actually hold on tighter to that money that was paid in. And so we don't have that. What we have, I think, from the as far as I'm concerned, from the traditional UI standpoint, is something that is a remnant of, we'll call it the Ronald Reagan era, when all of these benefits, even though they were paid into by workers, everybody was viewed as somehow committing fraud against the state or country they tried to access them. And so I think there needs to be a mindset as we move forward that these are benefits that have been paid into their people's rights. We shouldn't look at unemployment insurance like, it's a safety net, yes, but it's almost like, well, it's insurance. And so we have to redo our entire mindset of the department, I think, moving forward, because when I first came in 2013, we were facing this as remnants of the economic crash previously. We had the same kind of concerns. So it's time to clean this up for good. That's why I'm so excited about all of these bills, because whether or not EDD works quicker than we hopefully they will, we still need this codified into law so that we're never in this position again. There needs to be a mindset around this, and we have to quit blaming people who need government services and acting like they're somehow the ones committing fraud in the future.
And I would just add, because I do think that the part of this is about the culture at EDD, and I think all of us have welcomed a change in leadership for the department. The failings that began in the early days of the pandemic were, frankly, I think, exacerbated by a very closed culture that was refusing approaches for help from external companies, marquee name brand companies refusing to take direction from the federal government when they explicitly said, check your PUA claims against inmate records. 35 states in the country listened. California was one of 15 that didn't. And they time and again refused to engage with the legislature in a productive way. So I do think that the change in leadership at EDD is an important turning point. And I do expect there to be more acknowledgement that there are best practices that can be learned from other states and best practices that can be integrated from homegrown companies right here in California.
Thank you.
Ms. Court, next question.
Next question from Adam Beam from the AP. Adam, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I think I was muted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
An issue that's just coming to light now is people are receiving tax forms in the mail saying they owe taxes on unemployment benefits that they never received. And for some people, getting these forms in the mail is the first time they have learned their identity was stolen and used to claim bogus benefits. I was wondering if any of your constituents have contacted you about this, and are you confident that EDD will be able to issue corrected forms in time for the filing deadline?
I want to recognize Ms. Gonzalez, and I think Assemblymember Carrillo, you were also digging into this, if I am not mistaken, but Assemblymember Gonzalez.
I want to caution people that it's a bigger problem than that, because the fraud committed had a different address often. That's the address on file at EDD for the identity fraud. So for example, if somebody had stolen my identity, they wanted the check or the card to go to their house. So I'm not even getting the 1090 or the form saying I need to fill out taxes. That's a real problem. Now, the IRS has issued a statement saying people, even if they did get that form, they should only file taxes on their actual income. And this will be dealt with by EDD separately. They're going to have to get those out even if it's late, but they're not, from the looks of it and from everything I've read from the IRS, they're not going to be penalized for that. But this is going to be an ongoing problem that we have to deal with, because so many of those fraudulent cases were using a different address than the actual person. So there was this identity fraud. They don't even know it. They don't know that this tax form came out, and this is going to probably take better part of a year or two to clean up. It's a much larger problem than simply getting a form saying that you received payments that you didn't get. But if you do get one, it's been very clear, only pay taxes on your actual income and continue to handle. There's and I'm sorry I don't have it on me, a line, a phone line at EDD that you can call. We won't even say that. Call your assembly member's office and we'll help work through that.
Others? Assemblymember Correa, do you want to?
I can. Okay,
Assemblymember Salas.
Thank you. This is actually a question we asked in yesterday's hearing, was what they were doing about the 1099-Gs that people were mistakenly being sent to. And so we asked the director and the department, what are you going to do for all these individuals where it was actually fraudulent? Are you going to make individuals that have done everything right, and are you going to make them, you're basically going to penalize them because they're going to have to file this Form 1099-G. We were told by EDD and the department yesterday that they have a process in place and that there's a waiver in place for those individuals, so they're not paying on income that they did not receive because of the fraud.
Great. There's a broader conversation of what's happening to honest Californians that are swept up either in fraud or received more benefits than they perhaps were owed, but didn't know it at the time. And these are all topics, I think, from our perspective, we want to make sure that honest Californians that did not engage in fraud shouldn't be penalized for it. I think that's a perspective that we hold, and for each of these individual examples, we'll obviously examine it case by case. With that, Ms. Court, next question.
I just want to flag, we have a number of questions left in the queue, and some members are may need to head out. So I just want to flag that for everyone. But the next question comes from Josh Lyle. Josh, go ahead.
Yes, hello, thank you. Josh Lyle, ABC 10 in Sacramento. Thank you all for sharing your reform plans today. My question is about people who need help right now and aren't getting their benefits. These reforms address many problems and fixes down the road, but don't necessarily offer immediate relief for people who desperately need money right now. What can be done to help people who can't wait weeks or months to get their benefits? Is there anything or anyone who can make EDD make some changes that are needed right now and get people paid? Thank you.
Assemblymember Petrie Norris, did you want to jump on that?
I think that the most immediate answer is what Assemblywoman Gonzalez said, which is right now, it is our number one priority to ensure that constituents that need our help right now are getting help right now. So I would say, well, we don't want this to be the long-term process. Right now, you can contact your assembly member. So for folks in my district, it's 949-251-0074. We can help walk you through the process. We can help escalate your case, and we can help to speed a resolution. So in the short term, I do think that is the most productive thing for us to be telling folks.
And another point also is that there's two components, following up on what Assemblymember Petrie Norris said. Language access. Most of our offices speak the languages of our respective districts to the proportion that we can hire the staff that are multilingual. So it helps to have staff that can directly understand, process the information, and be able to expedite the issue on behalf of the constituents. Second, and this goes back to one of the questions earlier asked about why these challenges are facing California and what other states are doing about it. Again, as Assemblymember David Chu mentioned, nobody else has the sheer size that we do, and also no one has the dexterity of the issues that we do. A lot of employees are 1099 employees as well, and so there's been multiple challenges with that. That's where the PUA last year and the implementation of PUA came in, which helped to some extent, but that's an ongoing concern and issue, and it allows our staff to become experts in the specific needs while working with EDD and trying to address those needs.
Ms. Court, next question.
Next, we're going to go to Katie Murphy from Politico. Katie, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering what you make of the governor's response to the many problems that you have outlined today, whether he's been doing enough or if he acted quickly enough to try to solve them, and if not, wondering what, in your opinion, the governor needs to be doing right now.
So I'll start with an answer on that. This is a crisis that predated Governor Newsom and predated all of us in the legislature. This has been at least a decade in the making. And I know Governor Newsom has been very focused on this. There are many steps he has taken, from calling for a strike team that issued a really great report on future recommendations to replacing the leadership at EDD, which is something that many of us believe needed to happen, with creating a task force on how to root out fraud. And I appreciate that the administration has been engaging with us. We're interested in solutions. And I think Assemblymember Creo mentioned this before. We're not interested in finger pointing for our constituents, for Californians. This is happening on all of our watch, and we've got to get to the bottom of this. We need to turn this around as quickly as possible, and that's what we're focused on. Let me ask Ms. Court for the next question.
Next, we'll go to Dave Minushri. Dave, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, guys. I want to follow up real quick on the tax issue, because I know during the hearing yesterday that it was brought up. The EDD said they had a process, but one of the things they said is you won't be responsible for the tax bill if you are a victim of identity theft. But their response was that was because your state agency will catch up. But past history has not shown that EDD has been able to catch up. It has been really kind of behind the eight ball on all of this. We've been reporting on the tax forms possibility since last year, before fall even hit. So, you can see why people are understandably questioning whether or not they're going to catch up. And this is going to be a mess for the IRS for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, because we're getting this question a lot from our viewers, is these reforms all look great. The question they're going to ask is, why did it take so long? And is this really going to happen? Because we've been reporting on EDD's problems, which are almost exactly the same, except for the pandemic unemployment assistance program, for more than 10 years now. So is this really the final step, or it has gone back 3 administrations?
I'll start with an answer on the tax piece. I think this is an issue that many of us have been flagging with the new EDD leadership. They are acutely aware of the challenges. We are expecting more expanded answers from them on this topic, because we don't want to see honest Californians who, for reasons that they had nothing to do with, are going to get penalized. So we do expect to get more answers on this in the near term. I think to your question of how can you be assured that things are going to change? Listen, all of us we've been horrified as we have learned about what happened a decade ago. I, for one, read committee staff reports from the Great Recession, where they covered the exact same issues that we're dealing with today. And I don't think any of us want to be part of this generation of legislators to be accused 10 years from now not having fixed the problem. So I can say for myself, I'm sure this is the case for all of us. We are in this not just for the immediate short term, but to fix and reform this department so that it does not fail again as spectacularly as it has in the last year. Others?
And I would just to add on to that, because I think that was very well said. We are 100% committed to ensuring that the focus on EDD remains, even when it's not front page news and once this crisis has subsided. So, I know I am personally committed to ensuring that there is ongoing oversight and accountability of this department. And I know from my conversation with all of my colleagues on this call that they feel the same way. You've got Assemblymember Salas, who is the chair of our Joint Legislative Audit Committee. You've got Assemblymember Wendy Carrillo, who is chair of the Assembly's Budget Sub-4 Committee. We're responsible for holding EDD accountable and for holding their feet to the fire if they're not delivering. And we're committed to doing that.
Anyone else? Assemblymember Carrillo?
Yeah, I'll just echo the same sentiments. This has been a decades-long problem, and I appreciate those in the press that have been covering it. I think there's an opportunity for a new moment for the governor's office, for the legislature to really think about what the future of the state looks like, what our technology looks like, how can we be the home of Silicon Valley and not have a system that reflects that throughout government, not just EDD, but various departments that need a lot of innovation and a different mindset in terms of how do we best, at the end of the day, help people. That's what we're tasked with. Budget Sub-4 and on state oversight is responsible for overseeing EDD as well as various other departments. And I'm really looking forward to working with my colleagues to continue to address the problem. So identify the problem, seek the solution to it, understanding that there's a lot of changes in leadership in the department, and at the end of the day, providing the resources necessary to be able to move us forward. And I also want to say, thank you to all of the employees of EDD that are also trying to figure out how they do distance learning with their children. How do they do their jobs from home? None of us were set up to really do that on an everyday scale, and people are trying. But there is a system that is antiquated. There's technology that is antiquated. All of these things are things that we get to work on and hopefully procure the right type of contracts that enable us to move forward and really bring good government to the people of California.
Assemblymember Salas.
Thank you, Assemblymember Chu. Definitely, this is going to be an issue that's going to stay with us, and we're going to remain committed to fixing it. And really, it's because Californians, our constituents, are demanding change, and they want these reforms, and they want to see them implemented. Yesterday's hearing, we heard some answers that don't instill complete confidence with many of us here in the legislature, just because of the findings of the audit reports and what we're seeing. I think where we can see where we would appreciate the governor stepping in and being a true partner is not waiting for a whole year to implement some of these reforms and some of these changes. When we talk to the department and we talk to the director, she says she's committed to reforming and modernizing EDD, and there's no reason why we need to wait. Californians are suffering now. They should be implementing some of these changes now, whether it's a comprehensive plan to deal with the crisis as we continue to move forward. And that's even when you reference the 1099-G forms. We know this is an issue. We know this is going to continue to be an issue as we move towards tax season. There's no reason why they can't have a plan in place now to help these individuals, to help streamline the waiver process if we're going to seek that from the federal government. And those should all be things that should be implemented now. That's all the legislators on this call, I believe, are all pushing forward so that our constituents so that Californians are getting the help that they need.
Ms. Court, next question.
Next question will be from Randy Mack. Randy, go ahead.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have two questions. The first part is, how long is the leash for Rita Saines? She's only been on the job now for about a month, and yet the seat is very hot, and she is on a ship that has taken on water. And right now she is trying to bail water as much as she can. But it seems that the level of frustration that she's inherited doesn't give her a lot of wiggle room to try to implement everything that needs to be done right now in the immediate future. And secondly, and I think Assemblymember Gonzalez touched on it, but how much responsibility do lawmakers actually bear for prioritizing safety net issues when often budgetarily the mindset is that these things are processes and monies that people aren't necessarily entitled to. And now we see just how close people are to a lot of financial upheaval if they lose a job or if they're unemployed for a certain period of time. You're in food lines in California, considering the cost of living here. And so how much of that mindset can actually be changed so that budgetarily social safety net issues actually become priorities and not political footballs of people pointing to people as others, as opposed to constituents who will need these services, if not now, perhaps at some point down the road?
So Randy, I'll answer both your questions, and then obviously happy to have our colleagues to chime in as well. But with regards to our new director, I think it's fair to say that there was enormous frustration with the previous director, and frankly, the previous EDD leadership team that had been in place for quite some time that had not executed on the reforms that were needed over many years. The new director, she has come into the middle of a very intense crisis. And I think for many of us, we want to give her the benefit of the doubt. We want to give her time to not just figure out how to figure out the details within a bureaucracy, but give her time to put into effect the reforms that we need and the recommendations from the strike team report that have to get done. But that being said, she knows we will be working with her and asking her to be accountable as she needs to be to the public. So we will be monitoring this month by month and expecting to see progress. I'm hopeful, but she does have one of the hardest jobs in government at this moment. And we all really, truly wish her well, because someone has to turn that agency around. And we're really hopeful and hoping that it will be her. On the other question of California and our social safety net, I'm proud of the fact that our state has one of the most generous and progressive social safety nets in the country. I don't think we can be accused of not having a social safety net that can take care of folks. The issue with EDD was not that we didn't have the money to pay folks. It was that the administration of how that money got to people had serious, incredible challenges. And so it was not about the fact that we didn't have budget for the social safety net. It was about bureaucratically ensuring that occurs. And that is on all of us as legislators with oversight, as well as the administration, to work together to make sure that administration is fair and efficient and gets out checks to help people pay the rent and put food on the table. So that is of absolute importance. I think the fact the legislature this past week authorized $2.6 billion to struggling tenants to be able to make their rent is yet another indication that our commitment is to getting the resources we need to folks who are suffering, folks who are not making it during this time period. We're committed to that, but we have to just make sure that happens in a smart way. Any other comments from colleagues on it?
Can I just add on that one?
Yes, please, Ms. Urban.
Yeah, as an advocate for unemployment insurance for a decade, we've seen a lot of changes in leadership at EDD. We have seen a lot of issues with getting these changes implemented. These, as many of the Assembly members have pointed out, are not new issues. What we're doing differently this time is mandating them by statute. So we're not just going to let EDD make the decisions about who is at the table and who they have to report to, but these bills will actually make real changes for claimants that are not costly changes in the first place to implement, but will allow the decisions that the department makes in the future to have accountability. It has not been about a lack of funding at EDD, at least in the last 10 years that I've been a part of it. It's been decisions to allocate that money to processes that are not conducive to the claimant, that have not been thought through for their long-term impact on the availability of benefits. And that's what needs to change. And that's what these bills do.
Ms. Court.
Okay, our last question, or the last question in the queue, is from Kenny Troy.
Thanks for taking our questions this morning. During the oversight hearing last week, Bank of America, we heard several times from the bank executives saying that they would get back to you on certain questions that the lawmakers asked. What kind of follow-ups have each of you done who were there that day based on what you heard that day or questions that didn't get answered?
Assemblymember Carrillo.
I can take that on. So the Bank of America and EDD both said the same response to several questions. We are actually making those questions public in a letter to both the EDD department as well, EDD, and to Bank of America. And we are giving them about a week or so to respond to those questions and make those answers public as well. So it's not a hearing that just took place and no longer is in our wheelhouse. We are still holding the department and the financial institution accountable for those questions and transparency to the public. Absolutely.
I will add to that because I asked a couple of those questions of Bank of America. We had asked from the contract, how much money did Bank of America and EDD make off of unemployment debit card fees? And we just learned from CalMatters that the employment agency made $22.5 million on unemployment debit card fees as the pandemic ravaged our job market, but we still don't know from Bank of America how much they earned off the contract either this past year or over the previous 5 or so years. So there are many unanswered questions, and I am grateful to Chairman Carrillo for her diligent follow-up with Bank of America and others for answers. And
anything else from who was there that day?
I think at this moment, only Assemblymember Salas is still with us, and he was chairing the other committee. So it's just Chairwoman Carrillo, myself, who were present at that hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
For which hearing? The one that I did?
Yes.
So in that hearing was myself, Assemblymember Chu, Assemblymember Salas, Assemblymember Cooper, Budget Chairman Phil Ting, Assemblywoman Kati Petrie Norris, who was in this panel, and Assemblymember Nazarian, as well as Assemblymember Lackey, and Assemblymember Vince Fong.
Great. And with that, Ms. Court, are we at the end of our questions?
I believe so. There's a few hands. If your question is answered, please lower your hand. Let's do one follow-up question from Chris Chimura.
Thank you for the second bite at the apple. I'd like to just follow up on what you just discussed, Assemblymember Chu. We heard from a constituent by the name of Stacy Wilkin months ago who talked about the ATM card, the debit card, whatever you want to call it, and we noted the fees. And she made a plea on camera to the governor to just offer direct deposit because she felt it was just wrong that Bank of America was making money from these fees, from benefits that are intended for people who are struggling. Well, now we're learning at great delay that the state actually is clawing back some of that money through debit card fees. People are paying back to the state money the state paid to them to cover essentials. I'm curious your thoughts about that setup and whether it speaks to the spirit of what unemployment insurance is supposed to be.
Listen, I don't think any of us were happy to learn that the state was clawing $22.5 million from everyday constituents due to debit card fees on this. That was very surprising to me. And I think for all of us, we're absolutely going to have to revisit how this happens. I think this is exactly why both Assemblymember Gonzalez and Salas and others within our ranks why we're so keen on moving toward a direct deposit situation as opposed to a situation where a bank gets fees and then can kick back some of those fees back to the state. I personally think that that 22.5 million ought to be devoted to dealing with the very situation we're talking about here. And I'm sure that when that Bank of America contract comes up, we will all be scrutinizing it very carefully. I, for one, am not very interested in moving forward with it unless there's a really compelling case for it. But we'll deal with that as it comes up in the coming months. Assemblymember Carrillo.
Thank you, Assemblymember Chu. I would end with just some more broader insight in terms of we have a lot of work to do. The department has a lot of work to do. We have to figure out best practices with the current contract and any additional contracts that are currently being negotiated with Bank of America or with any other financial institution that's going to take on the nation's biggest state. Our unemployment rate went from 3% to 16% in weeks. We have 1.1 million households behind in rent in California. If anyone thinks that their ability to make ends meet is unrelated to the well-being of everyone else in the state, they are wrong. We are all connected. This is about the future of the state and the future of this nation. It isn't just about claimants. This is about all of us. We have a responsibility to be able to do our work and to ensure that we are providing the safety nets necessary for Californians. EDD is a safety net, but the way that EDD and Bank of America have treated Californians who are relying on assistance and are relying on government to work has been poor. EDD's mission is to help people. It is to help Californians, not to make them try to go through hoops to try to get the very assistance that they need at any given moment, but especially during the pandemic. And so I'm grateful to my colleagues. I'm grateful to be able to do this work together because often and in the past, it has been done in silos. That's why the department has been able to get away with not doing any improvements to a system in over a decade, despite various concerns and various different attempts to try to get them to move forward. So again, this is a new moment with new leadership and a new opportunity for California to be able to truly be a California for all and not just a California for some. We are all dedicated to ensuring that the department and the new leadership is successful, as well as the legislature and working with the governor's office to make sure that we move this ship forward.
With that, Ms. Court, are we wrapped up at this moment?
We have one last follow-up question from Randy Mack, and that'll be the last question we take.
Thank you. I just had one quick question that hasn't been addressed before by anyone yet. I have a viewer who is a teacher's aide, and as you guys know, last spring we were in the school season when the shutdown occurred, and there was a lot of people who were in limbo as to how we were going to proceed forward with the school year. She was only 3 days into this job as a new employee and thought that she would be immediately fired because schools were going to be closed down. They were going to move to remote instruction. She applied for unemployment benefits, but did not certify. Yet she received a debit card and she has received about 6 weeks worth or $6,300 worth of benefits that she's been trying to return to EDD since last May. What suggestion might you have for her? Because now she has received one of those 1099s and she just doesn't want to be taxed for the money. She said, I never wanted it. I wasn't entitled for it. I wasn't eligible for it. All I want to do is return it and not take a tax penalty for it. Is there any suggestion for her to be able to get this money back to EDD and get this off her back?
I think the quick thing I would say is reiterate what we've said before, which is I assume she's tried to contact EDD and has been unable to get through. And I would suggest that she speak to her legislator. We can assist and have been and are doing this around the clock in trying to bridge between EDD and our constituents. I don't want to comment about any specific person's cases, but just know every case is complicated and different. And would recommend that you reach out to our offices. And this is also where I should, again, reiterate my incredible thanks to the amazing men and women who work for the California State Legislature who are fielding these calls around the clock. And I also want to just take a moment and echo something Assemblymember Carrillo said. There are also thousands of EDD employees who are doing the same. So just appreciate the work they're doing. If you can't reach EDD, call our offices. We'll do what we can to get an answer to that question.
And the issue of overpayment and specific to this person and individual that you are currently talking about is exactly the piece of legislation that my office will soon be introducing. And we will have more details and we'll be able to share as we finalize language and as we finalize all the details. But overpayment and any interest charged by the department if they're not returned are all the things that we're currently looking at. And this individual is absolutely right. If she received an overpayment and she's not responsible for it, there are steps that need to be taken, but those steps aren't clear. And we are working with the department to ensure that there is cultural and language competency to ensure that individuals that are getting caught in this scenario actually know who to turn to and who to talk to figure out their situation. So as my colleague said, this person can contact their elected official, their assembly member or state senator to get assistance, or they can call my office directly since this is particularly the issue that we are tackling.
And the final word to Ms. Urban.
Yeah, and this is actually not going to be a problem in the future because this was only a result. These payments were only made during the period of time where weekly certifications were suspended in late March through May 9th. So those are the period of time where claimants would have been paid even though they hadn't certified. There is an address where claimants can send the money back. So if they didn't take it off their card, it can be returned immediately off the card, or they can send a check to EDD for that money. We've been working with a claimant in the same situation, and the check has not been cashed by EDD, and he did get the 1099-G still reporting that he had received those benefits. So EDD, though, knows this category of claimants. They have identified this category of claimants as those who potentially need to have their claims resolved. The claimant should also have certified for those benefits weeks. In November, up until November, there was a period of time where they could retro certify in order to be able to report their earnings so that EDD knew that they were not entitled to those benefits. So if the claimant did that, EDD definitely does know that there's been an overpayment and that those benefits should be paid back.
Great. I think it is the 12 o'clock hour. I just want to thank Jen Court and all the staffers that have worked together to put this on. Of course, thank our colleagues and the advocates. And I also want to just take a moment and thank the press. You have helped to bring to many of our attention situations that we were not early apprised of and have helped in moving this conversation forward. This is not an easy conversation, but appreciate the engagement, and we have a lot of work in front of us. So with that, I think we will sign off. Thank you very much.